War doesn't just rage on the battlefield. It rages in silence, in hearts, in shadows. One girl, one brother, in a fight that refuses to end. This is Silent Battles.
War is not just a clash of armies. It is not only the sound of bombs, the rumble of tanks, or the smoke rising over ruined buildings. War seeps quietly into homes. It creeps into bedrooms, into kitchens, into the small, fragile hearts of children. It steals laughter, interrupts play, and replaces comfort with fear. This is the story of one such child, Carrie. She was 12 when the world around her shifted, when the streets of London became dangerous, and when the life she had known crumbled beneath her feet. She lost her home, her familiar streets, the comfort of her family routines, but she did not lose her.
Carrie's story is not unique in history, yet in its uniqueness it is unforgettable. It reminds us of the children who endured the impossible, who carried fear like a shadow, and yet pressed forward with fragile hope.
London, 1940. The city thrived in routine, unaware that the rhythm of everyday life would soon shatter. Carrie lived in a modest row house, one of many brick facades stretching along narrow streets. The scent of coal fires drifted through chimneys, mingling with the aroma of bread baking in nearby bakeries. Children played in alleys, their laughter echoing between buildings, while mothers called them home for dinner. Ellie's life was ordinary. She attended school, helped her mother with chores, and laughed with her younger brother, Nick. She had friends, small adventures, in the comforting hum of a home where love, though not always perfect, was steady and present.
But the war changed everything. It began subtly at first, a siren here, a ration card there, but soon the subtle signs grew into terror. London's skyline transformed from chimneys and rooftops into dark clouds of smoke. The sounds of laughter were replaced with the wailing of air raid sirens. Every knock at the door, every rumble overhead was a reminder that nothing could be taken for granted anymore. One July morning, the government's evacuation orders arrived like a thunderclap. Children were to be sent out of London to safer areas in the countryside. Carrie's parents, like many others, were faced with impossible decisions. They had to send their children away, possibly for years, into the care of strangers. Carrie packed her small bag with care, folding her clothes neatly, tucking away a few personal treasures, a tiny doll, a worn notebook, and a photograph of her parents. Her small hands trembled as she zipped the bag, her heart a mixture of fear, grief, and confusion. Nick clung to her side, eyes wide, as though expecting the world itself to swallow them whole. "Where are we going, Carrie?" he asked in a trembling voice. She swallowed her own fear.
"Smile. Somewhere safe," she said. "We'll be okay." But even as the words left her lips, she knew they were only a fragile shield against the reality she could not yet face.
The train station was a cacophony of emotions: crying mothers, stoic fathers, hurrying nurses, and exhausted teachers trying to keep order. Children sat in clusters, clinging to one another or staring silently at the ground. The air smelled of coal smoke, damp uniforms, and the faint tang of fear. Carrie held Nick's hand tightly as the train whistle blew. The train jolted, and the children were pushed into their compartments. Carrie looked out the window as London receded, seeing the familiar streets disappear behind walls of smoke. Her stomach tightened with each passing mile. The countryside unfolded slowly, rolling hills and fields stretching endlessly. It was beautiful and strange, unfamiliar, yet strangely calm compared to the chaos they had left behind. Carrie pressed her forehead to the cold window, watching as trees and rivers blurred past.
Inside the compartment, other children whispered about their fears, about bombs and missing parents. Some cried quietly, others sat in stunned silence. Carrie wished she could tell them all it would be all right, but the words fell hollow, even to her own ears.
Hours passed, and the train slowed, eventually stopping in a quiet station surrounded by misty hills. Wales greeted them, not with the noise of a bustling city, but with silence that pressed on their ears. The air smelled of wet grass and pine, of earth freshly turned and unspoiled. Carrie and Nick were guided by volunteers to the homes where they would stay. Their new guardians waited, strangers whose faces told of lives lived under strict rules and routine. Among them was Mr. Evans, a man whose gaze was sharp, whose expression left little room for warmth. Carrie could sense the weight of rules already in the air, rules that would shape their days, their behavior, their very survival. Yet not all faces were harsh. Auntie Lou, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes, greeted them with warmth. She gave them tea, helped them settle in, and whispered reassurances that this was a place where they could be safe. For a brief moment, Carrie allowed herself to believe it. That night, as Carrie lay on the narrow bed, listening to Nick's even breathing beside her, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of loss. London, her home, the streets, the smells, the routines gone. And yet, she could not cry. She could only think, only plan. She had to protect Nick. She had to endure. She had to find the courage she did not know she possessed. Outside, the wind whispered through the hills. Carrie imagined the bombs still falling over London, imagined the chaos, the destruction, the family shattered. She drew her knees to her chest, wishing she could hold the world together in her small arms. The night stretched endlessly, filled with dreams that flickered between hope and fear. And in the quiet of that strange house in Wales, Carrie made a silent promise. She would survive, and she would protect her brother.
Days passed, but the strangeness of Wales clung to Carrie like morning fog. The hills seemed to watch her, silent and ancient. Every sound from the bleating of sheep to the distant rush of wind felt foreign. Even the sky looked different here, wider and emptier, as though the world had been stretched. Carrie tried to adjust. She learned the rules of the house: wake early, work hard, speak politely, disturb nothing. Mr. Evans saw everything, noticed everything, judged everything. His sternness weighed on the children, especially Nick, who often hid behind Carrie whenever he entered the room, but Auntie Lou brought balance. She slipped biscuits to them after dinner, smiled softly when Mr. Evans wasn't looking, and hummed gentle tunes while sweeping the kitchen. Her kindness wrapped around the children like a warm shawl. School in the village brought new challenges. The children spoke with thick accents Carrie struggled to understand. Some were curious about the London evacuees. Others whispered or giggled behind their backs. But Carrie held her head high. She would not let them see her fear. Nick, however, found it harder. He missed their mother's voice, the safety of home, the rhythm of London. Carrie caught him crying behind the school building one afternoon. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I'm here. No matter what, I'm here." The village itself was beautiful stone cottages, narrow lanes, fields that rolled like waves. Yet beneath its charm, Carrie felt something else. A stillness. A secret. Something the villagers didn't say, but always carried in their eyes. One misty morning, while walking with Nick, Carrie noticed an old house perched on a hill. Its windows were dark, its roof sagging, its garden wild and overgrown. Yet there was something mesmerizing about it. An old woman from the village later whispered, "That's Druid's Bottom, a place full of stories and ghosts." Carrie felt a shiver, not of fear, but of curiosity. Something about that house tugged at her. It felt important. Life with Mr. Evans grew more complicated. He expected perfection: clean chores, proper manners, silence at meals. A single mistake could ignite his temper. One evening, Nick accidentally knocked over a jug of milk. Mr. Evans slammed his fist on the table, his voice booming through the house. Nick froze, trembling. Carrie stepped in front of him, chin raised, voice steady. "It was an accident." Mr. Evans stared at her, shocked by her boldness. But Carrie didn't lower her eyes. She couldn't, not when her brother needed her. From that day, something shifted. Mr. Evans watched her more closely, as though trying to decide whether she was brave or rebellious. Weeks later, a letter arrived. Their mother's handwriting trembled across the page. She wrote about the bombings, the sleepless nights, the fear that clung to the city. But she also wrote that she was proud, so proud of Carrie for taking care of Nick. Carrie read the letter aloud, her voice soft but steady. Nick gripped her hand tightly. "Do you think she's safe?" he whispered. Carrie nodded, though her heart felt heavy. "She's strong, just like us." But that night, under the covers, Carrie cried silently. Missing home was a quiet ache, persistent, piercing, and always present. As autumn deepened, the world around them changed. Leaves turned gold, the air grew crisp, and the villagers prepared for harsher days ahead. Carrie felt herself changing, to growing braver, sharper, wiser, yet the secrets of Druid's Bottom lingered in her mind. And soon, she would discover that the old house on the hill held truths that would shape her journey and test her courage in ways she never imagined. The night had settled over the house like a heavy blanket, but Carrie felt wide awake, as if something inside her refused to rest. She sat in front of the old trunk she had avoided for years. It was the one thing she never had the courage to open, because she knew that everything inside it carried a weight she wasn't ready to face. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she felt pulled toward the truth. Her fingers brushed away the dust from the lid, and with a slow push, it opened. A faint smell of old paper and forgotten memories rose into the air. Inside the trunk lay things she recognized only vaguely: photographs, letters, clothing, military tags. And at the very bottom, buried beneath everything else, was a small diary. Ellie's diary. Just seeing his handwriting on the cover made her heart twist. She held it for a long moment, almost afraid that opening it would reopen wounds she had painfully tried to close. But something inside her whispered that it was time. She opened the diary. The first page had a short message, simple enough in words, but heavy enough to break her breath. If I don't return, don't let my story end here, Ellie. Carrie closed her eyes. Her body felt hollow. For years she had lived with unanswered questions, unspoken doubts, in a silence that grew louder every day. But here, in her hands, was the truth she had been avoiding. She turned the pages slowly. Ellie had written about everything: his fears, his hopes, his regrets, things he never had the chance to say to her. In one entry he wrote, "Carrie doesn't know how strong she is. She thinks she breaks easily, but she doesn't know she's the only reason to carry on." Her throat tightened. Why hadn't he ever said this to her? Why had he chosen to keep all this pain inside instead of sharing it with her? As she continued reading, she found something else. A sealed envelope with her name on it. The handwriting was unmistakably Ellie's. She hesitated, but eventually opened it. The letter felt like a piece of him returning from a time she believed was gone forever. Ellie had written, "Carrie, if you're reading this, it means life took a turn we didn't expect. But I want you to know something. You were never the reason for my pain. You were always the reason I believed pain was worth surviving." Carrie wiped her face with the back of her hand. She didn't even realize tears had started falling again, quiet tears she thought had dried years ago. For a long moment she sat there with the letter pressed to her chest, trying to steady the storm inside her. She whispered into the empty room, "Why didn't you tell me, Ellie? Why did you make me feel like I was walking alone?" But the silence didn't answer. She looked back at the diary, flipping through more pages. The deeper she went, the more she learned. Ellie had never been afraid of war. He had been afraid of leaving her behind. Every page was a piece of him, a struggle he never showed, a love he never fully spoke aloud. And somewhere between the lines, Carrie felt something break, but not in the way things usually break. This break didn't feel like loss. It felt like awakening. Her breathing slowly calmed. Her hands, which had been shaking, finally stilled. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lost. She felt called. She turned to the last page of the diary. Ellie had written a line she had to read twice to understand. It was short, but it Her carried hands more trembled weight than as she anything touched else the she had
carved
read.
numbers.
If I don't return,
Someone had been here.
Carrie will.
With Ellie,
She stared at
someone
the
Ellie
words,
didn't write
not
about.
sure whether to
Someone
cry
who
or
left
to
no
breathe.
name,
It
no
felt like
trace,
Ellie had left
just
her
this
something.
mark.
Not
Carrie
just
felt the
memories,
first true
not
wave of
just
fear
pain,
since she had
but a
begun her
path.
journey.
She
The truth
finally
wasn't
stood up,
going to
the
be
diary
simple.
still in
It
her
wasn't
hands.
just about
Her heart
war.
still
It
hurt,
wasn't
but
just
the
about
heaviness
loss.
had changed.
Something
It
happened
wasn't a
here,
burden
something
anymore.
Ellie had been
It
trying
was
to warn her
direction.
about in the
Carrie
quietest
whispered,
way
her
possible.
voice soft
She
but
stepped
strong.
back,
If
feeling
you
the
didn't
weight of
come
the
back,
discovery
Ellie,
settle on
then
her
I will go
shoulders.
where you left
For the
from.
first time
I'll
since
find
leaving
your
home,
truth.
Carrie
I'll finish your
realized
story.
she
I'll
wasn't
live
just
the part you
following
couldn't.
Ellie's path.
And with that,
She was stepping
something
into a
inside her
mystery
shifted
he never
completely.
got to
The
finish.
grief she had
And
carried
whatever
for so
happened
long
next,
didn't
she could
disappear,
no longer
but it
turn back.
transformed. It turned into a resolve she had never known before. That night, for the first time, Carrie didn't feel abandoned. She felt chosen. Chosen to hold the truth. Chosen to carry the story forward. And without realizing it, in that quiet, trembling moment, the morning after Carrie discovered Ellie's diary felt strangely heavy. She didn't sleep, not because she was restless, but because reading Ellie's words had woken something inside her that had been buried for years. Every line she had read kept replaying in her mind, every confession, every fear, every hope he had written silently while pretending to be strong in front of her. For years she had lived in a fog, drifting through days with no purpose except surviving them. But now, the fog was clearing, and the truth that appeared behind it was painful but powerful. Carrie spent the morning sitting by the window, the diary resting on her knees. The sunlight touched its pages softly, as if warming the memory of someone who was no longer there. Carrie traced her fingers over Ellie's handwriting as if she could feel him through it. She read one entry again. Carrie thinks she needs me. But the truth is, I needed her more than she ever needed me. A small, broken smile touched her lips. For a long time, she had blamed herself for Ellie's silence, believing she hadn't been enough, or that she failed to understand him. But now she realized it wasn't that. Ellie had kept his pain hidden because he loved her too much to let her carry it. Now she was carrying it anyway. and she finally understood that this burden was not a punishment. It was a responsibility. By afternoon, she found herself opening the trunk again, this time searching for anything that could point her toward Ellie's last days. There were letters addressed to his unit, a photograph of him with his fellow soldiers, and a folded map with a marked location. Carrie stared at the map for a long moment. The mark was circled in thick pen. A tiny note beside it read, "The place I must return from. Return from, not return to." Carrie felt a shiver. This wasn't just a marking, it was a message. A clue left for her. A piece of truth waiting to be found. For a long moment, she sat still, the map fluttering slightly in her hands. Deep inside, she felt the same mixture of fear and courage that Ellie must have felt while writing those words. She whispered to herself, "I'm going to find out what happened to you. Every part of it." The decision was no longer a question, it was a direction. Carrie didn't pack quickly. She moved slowly, thoughtfully, picking only things she truly needed: Ellie's diary, the map, a few clothes, and a photograph of the two of them from years ago taken on a day when life felt simple and love felt endless. As she closed her bag, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Tucked into a corner of the trunk was a small audio recorder. A red light on the side told her the battery was long dead, but she pressed the button anyway. Nothing. She opened the battery cover and gasped softly. Inside it was a tiny note, folded twice. Ellie's handwriting again. "When you're ready, play this." Carrie stared at it, her breath caught halfway in her chest. What had Ellie recorded? Why didn't he tell her? Why hide it in the trunk where she might never find it? She placed the recorder gently inside her bag. She didn't know what it contained, but she knew one thing: she needed to hear Ellie's voice again, even if it shattered her. As the sky turned orange in the late afternoon, Carrie stepped outside her house. It had never felt so quiet before, almost as if the world itself knew she was leaving for something she couldn't turn back from. She walked to the bus stop with steady steps, but inside her chest, her heart felt like it was fighting storms. For years she had avoided everything about Ellie's disappearance. Now she was walking directly into it, into the unknown, into the truth, into a past she never understood. But she wasn't afraid anymore. As the evening wind brushed against her face, Carrie whispered, "Ellie, wherever you were going, I'm coming too. I'll follow every step you left behind." The bus arrived, the doors opened with a low hiss, and Carrie climbed inside. She took a seat by the window, holding Ellie's diary tightly in her hands. For the first time since losing him, she felt like she was moving again, not away from the past, but toward it, toward the place where answers waited, toward the place where Ellie's story stopped, and hers would begin. And without knowing it, as the bus pulled away, Carrie stepped into the chapter that would change everything. Her journey was no longer about grief, it was about truth. The bus ride felt longer than it truly was, not because of the distance, but because Carrie's mind was thick with memories and questions. Every few minutes, she opened Ellie's diary again, rereading lines she already knew by heart. She watched the world pass by through the window-blurred houses, empty fields, the soft outline of distant hills, but none of it settled inside her. Her thoughts stayed with Ellie. The town she arrived in was quiet, almost forgotten by time. It wasn't large or remarkable, but it was the place Ellie had been stationed last, the last trace of him she could find on paper, the final location written in the military records she had spent years avoiding. Carrie stepped off the bus with her bag slung over her shoulder and the diary held close to her chest. The air smelled of dust and old memories, as if the town itself had stories buried beneath its silence. She walked slowly, studying the map she found in the trunk. Ellie had circled an abandoned training camp just outside the town. The mark seemed heavy with meaning, like a secret waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Carrie felt something shift inside her, a mix of fear and determination, as she followed the path leading through narrow roads and quiet lanes. On the way, she passed an old shop. A man sat outside, his eyes scanning her curiously. He hesitated. Something about his gaze felt familiar, as if he recognized the resemblance she carried not in her face, but in the sadness that surrounded her. Before she could walk away, he spoke. "You're not from here, are you?" Carrie stopped. "No." The man leaned forward, studying her again. "You look like someone I knew. A soldier, quiet boy, kept to himself." Carrie's heart leapt. "Ellie?" The man nodded slowly. "Yes, that was his name." For a moment, Carrie forgot how to breathe. She stepped closer. Do you remember anything about him?" The man's eyes softened. "He used to sit outside this shop every evening, bought the same tea every time. always looked like he was carrying something heavy inside. He wasn't like the others. Carrie swallowed. What do you mean? He wasn't afraid of the war, the man said quietly. He was afraid of something else. Carrie felt the world tilt slightly. Ellie had written something similar in his diary. Something about fears he couldn't speak aloud. But hearing it from someone else made it real, in a way words on a page never could. The man continued. There were days he'd stand there, staring toward the hills, like he was waiting for someone who never came. Carrie's chest tightened. She knew exactly who Ellie had been waiting for. Before she could ask anything more, the man pointed toward the edge of the town. The camp you're looking for. It's that way. Be careful, nobody goes there anymore. Carrie thanked him softly and walked away. But the man's words stayed with her. Ellie waiting, watching, carrying fears he never spoke of. The path to the camp was narrow and overgrown. Weeds brushed against her legs, and the wind whistled through the broken fence that once guarded the perimeter. The place looked abandoned long before the war had ended, silent, forgotten, almost haunted by the memories of the men who had trained there. Carrie stepped inside the ruins. Rusty gates creaked behind her. Concrete walls stood cracked and empty. But she could almost feel Ellie there, his footsteps, his thoughts, his silence. She walked through the training grounds slowly, trying to imagine what Ellie must have felt on his last days here. And then she noticed something, faint scratches on a wall. She moved closer. At first, they looked like random marks. But when she wiped the dust away, her breath caught in her throat. It was a date, scratched into the wall. The same date written on the last page of Ellie's diary. The day he disappeared. Her hands trembled as she touched the carved numbers. Someone had been here. With Ellie, someone Ellie didn't write about. Someone who left no name, no trace. Just this mark. Carrie felt the first true wave of fear since she had begun her journey. The truth wasn't going to be simple. It wasn't just about war. It wasn't just about loss. Something happened here, something Ellie had been trying to warn her about in the quietest way possible. She stepped back, feeling the weight of the discovery settle on her shoulders. For the first time since leaving home, Carrie realized she wasn't just following Ellie's path. She was stepping into a mystery he never got to finish. And whatever happened next, she could no longer turn back. Ellie's world, though scarred and fragile, was slowly finding rhythm again. Days passed in a haze of numbness and forced endurance, but beneath all of it, something inside her was hardening like steel heated in fire. She didn't recognize it yet, but she was changing. Pain was shaping her into someone she had never imagined she could become. But life rarely allows healing without testing the wounds again. One cold evening, as Ellie returned from gathering water, she felt the ground tremble beneath her feet, soft at first, then stronger, like the heartbeat of war returning to claim her peace. The air thickened with dust. The birds, the few that still survived, burst from the trees in panic. And then she heard it, the distant thunder of machines, armored trucks, military trucks. But this time, they were not just passing. They were coming toward the village. Women rushed outside. Children cried. Old men whispered prayers. And Ellie, she froze, because the sound of those engines held memories sharp enough to tear through her chest. She remembered the night her family was taken. The boots, the screams, the fire. And suddenly she wasn't 17 anymore. She was the helpless girl she used to be, standing on the ashes of her home. The truck stopped at the center of the village. Soldiers spread out, shouting orders. But these uniforms were different, darker colors, unfamiliar insignias. Rumor had spread for months about new forces rising, new hands trying to claim old lands. And now they were here. Ellie's heart pounded. She knew what occupation meant. She had lived it, and she knew survival demanded quick thinking. She hid behind a broken wall, watching as soldiers gathered villagers in a line. She searched desperately for Lion, her little brother. He was nowhere. A sudden fear slammed into her. Had he been caught? Had he run? Was he hiding? Ellie pushed through the crowd, slipping between people, ignoring the shouts. She wouldn't lose him, not again, not another piece of her soul. At last, she found him behind an abandoned storehouse, curled into a ball, shaking silently. She knelt beside him. He grabbed her hand so tightly it hurt. And in that trembling moment, Ellie made a promise not spoken, but carved into her bones. She would protect him, no matter what. But promises mean nothing to war. The soldiers began dividing the villagers, some to the left, some to the right. No one knew why. No one dared to ask. Ellie's breath froze as she realized this wasn't a check. It was a selection. Her heart thudded painfully as they approached. The commander barked orders. His voice was sharp like metal breaking stone. The crowd trembled. Ellie held her brother close, trying to make him invisible with her arms, but the soldiers found them. A hand grabbed Ellie's arm. Another pulled Lion away. He screamed her name, twisting, fighting, his small hands clawing desperately at the air between them. Ellie fought back, but she was nothing compared to armored men with rifles. Her nails scraped against their gloves. Her voice cracked as she pleaded, begged, words pouring out with the last pieces of her strength. But war does not care about pleas, or promises, or love. They dragged Lion toward the group on the right. Ellie was shoved into the group on the left. She staggered, falling to her knees. Panic crushed her lungs. She tried to rise again, but a soldier slammed a rifle butt into her shoulder, forcing her down. All she saw was Lion's terrified face. All she heard was his cry. And then, a single gunshot tore through the air. The world fell silent. Ellie's breath stopped. The selection had begun, and her fight was no longer for survival. It was for truth, for strength, for revenge, for the love she refused to lose. The gunshot that split the sky that day never stopped echoing inside Ellie's chest. Even hours after the soldiers finished their cruel selection, the air of the village felt carved open, raw, bleeding, trembling. Ellie sat beside a burnt wall, her knees pulled to her chest, her mind replaying the moment Lion was torn away from her. She could still feel his small fingers slipping out of her grasp. She could still hear his voice, high and terrified, calling her name as if she were the only safe place left in the world. But the world had no safe places now. Night fell heavy and fast. The soldiers camped in the center of the village, their fires glowing like eyes in the dark. No one slept. Fear crept through every house, every cracked doorway, every trembling heart. But Ellie wasn't thinking about fear. She was thinking about her brother. Where had they taken him? Was he alive? Was he cold? Was he calling for her? Questions with no answers turned inside her like broken glass. She felt as if she was being torn apart from the inside. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but she also knew one thing very clearly: Lion needed her alive. Her grief hardened into determination. That night, while the village stayed silent, Ellie moved through the shadows like someone who had nothing left to lose. She counted the soldiers, watched their movements, memorized their patterns. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have a plan. But she had something far more dangerous. A purpose. And purpose turns ordinary people into forces war cannot predict. At dawn, the soldiers began preparing for departure. Trucks rumbled to life. Orders were barked. Ellie's heart hammered as she scanned the groups of taken villagers. She searched for Lion's face through the metal grills, through gaps between soldiers. Nothing, and then something strange. A small boy was shoved out of one of the trucks, but not for transport. The soldier yelled at him, waving a piece of paper. The boy ran, stumbled, then bolted toward the edge of the forest, clutching the paper to his chest. For a moment, Ellie didn't understand, and then it hit her. It was not a child running for freedom. It was a message, a forced courier, a warning, or a secret too dangerous to speak openly. Ellie's instincts burned awake. She followed quietly, keeping distance, staying behind the ruins and the trees. The boy didn't stop running until he collapsed near a fallen trunk, panting, shaking, his hands trembling around the paper he'd been forced to carry. Ellie approached slowly. The boy looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Don't take it," he whispered. "They're watching. They're always watching," she answered softly. "But I'm not here to hurt you." He hesitated, then handed her the paper as if it weighed 1,000 lives. Ellie unfolded it with numb fingers. Inside was a rough sketch, a facility outline, coordinates, and a single word scribbled in rushed handwriting: survivors. Ellie's breath stopped. This wasn't a warning. It was a clue, a direction, a path, a chance to find her brother. Her fear melted away, replaced by a fire that no army could extinguish. Ellie looked up at the distant horizon, where smoke from the military trucks rose like dark towers against the sky. Whatever that facility was, whatever truth waited behind its walls, she would go, even if it meant walking into the mouth of war itself. The forest smelled of damp soil and fear as Ellie walked deeper into the trees, clutching the crumpled paper like it was the last fragile thread tying her to her brother. She had no map, no food, no guidance, only the rough sketch and the word that kept her alive. Survivors, but the path to truth is never gentle. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her legs ached, her shoulders still throbbed where the soldier's rifle had struck her, and exhaustion clung to her like a cloak soaked in grief. She wanted to rest. She wanted to cry. She wanted someone, anyone, to tell her that Lion was safe, but war never gives reassurance. Only hints, only shadows. By afternoon, Ellie found herself on a hill overlooking a vast stretch of land ravaged by conflict. Burnt fields, empty houses, trees snapped in half as if giants had walked through them. And in the far distance, she saw something that froze her breath. Coils of pale smoke rising from a fenced compound, the same direction as the coordinates. Her heart trembled. Was this the facility? Was Lion inside? She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind push against her face. She imagined her brother's small hands tugging at her sleeve the way he used to when he was scared. She heard his laughter echoing from old memories that now felt foreign and unreachable. A tear slid down her cheek. "We're almost there, Lion," she whispered, though no one was there to hear. She descended the hill, her body tired, but her soul burning. As she neared the ground, she spotted something lying in the dirt half buried in ash. She knelt down and slowly lifted it, a tiny cloth bracelet. Torn, dirty, burned on one side, but unmistakably familiar. It was Lion's. He had braided it himself months ago, using scraps of string he'd found. He used to tell her that it protected him from nightmares. Ellie pressed it to her chest as if holding him. And then she felt it. Warmth, human warmth, not from the bracelet, but from the ground beneath it. She brushed the dirt aside and uncovered a footprint. Small, light, recent. Her breath caught in her throat. Lion had been here, not long ago, but alongside his print, there was another, a soldier's boot. Heavy, deep, merciless. The heartbreak struck her like a physical blow. He wasn't just taken, he was being moved, and every minute she spent standing still meant another minute he was out of reach. Ellie's hands shook. She sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the crushing weight of the moment. The forest around her blurred as tears finally broke through. It wasn't just fear now. It was the terror of hope slipping away. How close had she come? How far had they already gone? Had he cried for her? Did he think she abandoned him? The questions tore through her like Nivish pressed her forehead to the ground, clutching the bracelet as if it could stop time, stop war, stop the world. For the first time since the invasion, Ellie cried not because she was weak, but because she cared so fiercely it hurt to breathe. And in her shaking silence, she made a promise to the earth beneath her. "I'll find you, Lion, even if I have to walk through fire." But the world has a cruel way of answering promises. Because just as she rose to continue her journey, she heard a sound behind her. Soft, slow, deliberate. The click of a gun being cocked. And a voice, cold and unfamiliar, whispered, "Don't move." Ellie froze. Her search for truth had finally found her, but not in the way she expected. The cold metal pressed against Ellie's back felt sharper than any memory she carried. The forest stood silent, as if every tree was holding its breath with her. Ellie didn't dare move, not even to swallow the fear crawling up her throat. Behind her, the voice spoke again, this time lower, almost curious. "Why are you following the trail?" She didn't answer. War had taught her one rule: silence is safer than truth. But the man didn't seem impatient. He didn't sound like the soldiers she'd escaped. There was no anger in his tone, just an unsettling calmness. He circled around her slowly, his boots crunching leaves. When he finally stepped into her view, Ellie felt her blood freeze. He didn't look like a soldier. No uniform, no insignia. Just dark clothes, a scar across his jaw, and eyes that had seen things even war would flinch at. And yet he held a military rifle like it was an extension of his body. A man trained to kill, but not belonging to any army. "Who are you?" Ellie whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he crouched in front of her, picking up the small footprint she had discovered minutes earlier. His gloved finger traced its outline. "This child," he said. "You're looking for him?" Ellie's heart stumbled. She didn't know if he was a threat. She forced herself to nod. He stared at her for a long moment, like he was searching her soul for lies. He stared at her for a long moment, like he was searching her soul for lies. Ellie swallowed hard. "I know." He shook his head. "No," he murmured. "You don't." Something about his tone, calm, dark, certain, sent a wave of dread through her. He stood up, scanning the trees with a trained eye. "They're moving the children to a different compound," he said. "A place where no one returns from." Her breath hitched. "Is my brother alive?" He looked at her, really looked, studying the desperation etched into every trembling line of her face. Then he did something Ellie didn't expect. He lowered his gun. And for the first time, his voice softened. "If you want a chance to reach him," he said, "you will follow me. But understand this, once you see what's inside that facility, your life will never go back to what it was." Ellie's throat tightened. That doesn't matter, she whispered. I just want him back. The man nodded once, a shadow crossing his expression as if he understood loss too deeply. Then he turned and began walking into the darker part of the forest. Ellie hesitated for just a heartbeat. Was she making a mistake? Was this man a savior, or another nightmare? But then she looked at the small bracelet in her hand, Lion's bracelet, and all doubt melted away. Ellie followed him. The forest around them grew darker, the air colder, the silence heavier. And then far ahead the faint glow of floodlights appeared through the trees, dozens of them. Towering walls, barbed wire, guard towers, patrolling shadows. The facility, the place where secrets lived, the place where nightmares were kept alive, the place where her brother might be waiting or dying. The man stopped and whispered, "Before we go any closer, you need to know one thing." Ellie's heartbeat pounded in her ears. He turned toward her, his eyes reflecting the cold white lights of the compound. "Your brother wasn't taken by accident," he said. Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" His answer came like a knife. "They took him because of you." For a moment, Ellie forgot how to breathe. "They took him because of you." Those words hit harder than any bullet, harder than any tragedy she had lived through. Her legs felt weak, her thoughts scrambled, her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her like he was deciding how much truth she was capable of surviving. Finally, he spoke. "You think this war destroys villages randomly? You think soldiers pick children without reason?" His voice was quiet but sharp. "No, everything they do is calculated." Ellie shook her head, confused. "I'm just a girl. I have nothing. Why would they? You survived something you weren't supposed to." He cut in, his eyes narrowing. "And they know it." Ellie froze. "What did I survive?" He didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on the facility ahead, its cold lights cutting through the darkness. "There was a fire," he said slowly. "Your village. Years ago. The night your parents died." Ellie's stomach twisted. A memory she tried to bury long ago began clawing its way back into her mind. The smoke, the burning rooftops, her mother's scream. "I don't want to talk about that," she whispered, trembling. But he continued anyway. "You weren't supposed to survive that night. No one was. But you did. You crawled out of that burning house when every other child inside died." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She felt the earth tilt beneath her. "No," she whispered. "I don't remember." "That's the point," he said sharply. "You weren't meant to remember." The forest felt suddenly too small, too silent, too close. Ellie stepped back. "Why are you saying this? How do you know all this about me?" He turned toward her fully for the first time, his face shadowed, unreadable. "Because I was there." The world stopped. Ellie's heart stumbled painfully. "You were in my village?" He nodded once, a movement so small, yet it shattered something inside her. "I was a soldier then," he said quietly. "Not for them, but for the group that tried to rescue your family. We arrived too late. Your parents were already gone. But you were still alive, barely breathing, covered in smoke." Ellie felt her vision blur. She wanted to scream, to run, to deny everything he was saying, but she stayed frozen. "We took you out," he continued. "We tried to hide you, but they found the records. They learned a child survived that fire. Why does that matter?" Ellie demanded, tears trembling in her eyes. Why would they care about a child from a burned village? He hesitated, then finally said the words she never expected. "Because your parents weren't ordinary villagers. They were part of a network that gathered information about the regime. And you were the last loose end." Ellie felt a coldness spread through her chest. "They think you know something," he said, "or that someday, you might remember something that can destroy them." Her mind spun. Everything she believed about her life cracked apart. "And Lion?" she whispered. "He's just a child." "They took him," the man said darkly, "to force you out of hiding." Her legs almost gave out. All this time, all the suffering, all the fear, it wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck. It was targeted. Her brother was paying the price for a secret she didn't even know she carried. Ellie wiped her face with shaking hands. A hollow ache burned in her chest, but beneath it, something else ignited. A fire. A dangerous, quiet fire. "If they want me," she whispered, "they'll get me. But not the way they expect." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, respect flickering in his expression. "That facility," he said, pointing at the floodlit compound ahead, "holds the children they consider valuable. Leverage, hostages, experiments." Ellie clenched her fists. "Is Lion inside?" The man exhaled slowly. Yes, and if we don't get him out soon. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Ellie stepped forward, jaw tight with determination. Then we go now, she said. I don't care what's waiting for us inside. The man nodded once, pulling a folded map from his jacket. If you want to save your brother, he said, you must be ready to face the truth your parents died protecting. Ellie stared at the facility, fear crawling up her spine. But she didn't look away. For Lion, she would walk into hell. The man whispered, welcome to the place where secrets burn. And together, they stepped into the darkness ahead. The closer Ellie and the man moved toward the facility, the colder the air became, as if the ground itself rejected the secrets buried inside those walls. Floodlights cut the darkness into sharp pieces. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter with dead, unblinking precision. Ellie's pulse hammered beneath her skin. The man, still unnamed, still half hidden in his own shadows, motioned for her to crouch beside a broken drainage pipe near the fence. This place, he whispered, was built to erase people, not hold them. Ellie swallowed hard. If Lion was inside, what had he seen? What had he endured? The thought alone could break her heart in half. The man pulled a small device from his pocket. A faint pulse of blue light flickered. It jams their cameras for 60 seconds, he whispered. We enter low, move fast, and don't look back. Ellie nodded, though her hands trembled against the cold metal pipe. He activated the device. The facility lights flickered once, twice, like the compound itself flinched. Move, he commanded. They darted through the grass, sliding into a narrow shadow beneath Tower 3. The man climbed first, pulling Ellie up silently. Her breaths were shallow, her heart pounding like it was trying to break free from her chest. Inside the outer fence, the atmosphere changed. The air wasn't just cold, it was sterile, empty, dead, like a place where children didn't cry because no one let them. They reached a side door with a keypad. The man typed something quickly. It unlocked with a reluctant hiss. How do you know the code? Ellie whispered. He didn't answer, just pushed the door open. Inside, the hallway was long, white, and silent as silent. The walls were marked with peeling paint and faded labels: Block A, Block C, Isolation Ward. Ellie's stomach tightened. The man stopped suddenly and held a hand out. Do you hear that? She listened closely. A faint sound, barely there, like soft tapping, or fingernails brushing metal. The man's jaw hardened. They're scared, he whispered. Ellie took a shaky breath. Which block? The children? He pointed ahead. Block D. Her legs moved on their own, faster than her thoughts. She didn't wait. She didn't think. She just ran. Ellie stopped, the man hissed. But she didn't. She couldn't. The thought of Lion alone, terrified, calling for her was enough to drown out every warning. She reached Block D, slamming her palms against the cold metal door. Her breath fogged the window, and she wiped it frantically. Her heart almost stopped. Inside the room, 8 children sat in silence, knees to their chest, eyes hollow. But Lion, he wasn't there. No, Ellie whispered, her voice breaking. Where is he? Where is Lion? She turned to the man, desperation spilling from her eyes. Where did they take him? The man didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on something behind her. Ellie followed his eyes. There was another door inside Block D. A smaller one, locked, unlabeled. Her pulse spiked with terror. She pounded the window. Lion, Lion, are you in there? No answer, only the faint echo of something scraping from the other side. The man grabbed her wrist. Listen to me, he said urgently. This isn't just a holding cell. This place, experiments on memory. Ellie froze. What do you mean? They test how trauma affects children. They try to erase memory, replace memory, manipulate it. Her blood ran cold. And your brother? He swallowed hard. Your brother was taken to the isolation wing because he resisted. He kept screaming your name. Ellie staggered back, her hand covering her mouth. He wouldn't forget you, the man continued. That makes him dangerous to them. The world felt like it tilted under her feet. They're trying to erase me from him, she whispered. No, the man said quietly. Something worse. Her heart stopped. What could be worse than erasing me? The man looked at her with a pain that didn't belong to a stranger. They're trying to replace you. Ellie felt the air vanish from her lungs. Replace her? With who? With what? Why? Before the man could speak again, an alarm exploded through the hallway. WRNING Block D breach. Red lights flashed. Guards shouted in the distance. Heavy boots thundered toward them. The man grabbed her hand. We need to go now. Ellie didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the small door inside Block D. The place where Lion might be. The place where they were doing things she could barely imagine. Her voice was a whisper. Broken, terrified. I'm not leaving without him. Ellie's legs burned as she ran through the shadowed corridors of the facility, clutching the photograph that had started it all. Behind her, alarms screamed like the cries of those they had lost. Guards shouted, boots pounding, lights slicing the darkness into sharp white lines. She reached the east gate just as Chiron had promised. Using the stolen ID badge, she disabled the electronic lock. The gate creaked open, and for a moment, freedom seemed within reach. But then through the flashing red lights she saw him, Lion. He was sitting on a metal bench, weak, bruised, but alive. His small hands clutched a tattered blanket, eyes wide with relief and fear. The moment he saw Ellie, he scrambled toward her, shouting her name. Ellie! Ellie! Tears streamed down her face. She dropped to her knees and wrapped him in her arms. The world narrowed to just this moment, the warmth of his small body pressed against hers, the sound of his heartbeat mingling with hers. I'm here, Lion. I'm here now. I won't let anyone take you again. Behind them, the shouts of guards grew louder. Ellie knew they had only seconds. She stood, dragging Lion behind her, and sprinted into the forest just as a dozen soldiers poured into the corridor. Branches lashed at their faces. The cold night air burned their lungs. But Ellie's determination was stronger than fear. She ignored the pain, ignored the exhaustion, ignored the screams behind her. Finally, they reached a ridge overlooking a river. The reflection of the moon shimmered on the water, like a pathway to safety. A small raft waited, hidden beneath reeds. Chiron had prepared it. Go! Chiron shouted from the trees, holding off the soldiers with gunfire. Ellie didn't hesitate. She pushed Lion onto the raft, climbed in herself, and they began paddling across the cold, dark water. Behind them, the facility burned with the fury of exposed secrets. The chaos they had caused in taking out its power grid was enough to slow pursuit. Lion's small hands gripped hers. You came for me, he whispered. Ellie kissed his hair, her voice breaking but firm. I will always come for you. Hours later, they reached the far shore. Exhausted, wet, but alive, Ellie and Lion collapsed under the trees. The moonlight fell on them like a blessing. The nightmare was over, at least for now. But the photograph, the files, the evidence, they carried the truth that could still change the world. Ellie knew their fight wasn't done, not entirely. She looked at Lion, then at the forest beyond. Her chest swelled with a strange mix of relief, grief, and strength. We survived, she whispered. And now, we start again. The war had taken much from her. But in that moment, as she held her brother close, Ellie realized that surviving, protecting, and remembering was the true victory. And somewhere deep inside, she smiled, even through the pain, knowing this was not the end but a new beginning. The camera of the story would fade out on their silhouettes, small but unbroken against the rising sun, ready to face whatever came next.